The airport was buzzing with the usual chaos. Lines at security, people rushing to their gates, and the never-ending hum of overhead announcements. It was the start of another long flight from Los Angeles to New York. But for Emily, the flight attendant, it was just another shift. She had seen hundreds of faces pass through her aisle, most of them just another passenger to serve. But as she made her way down the jet bridge, she noticed a man sitting in seat 3B, casually flipping through a magazine, his face mostly hidden behind dark sunglasses. Great, Emily muttered under her breath. Another celebrity trying to avoid the spotlight. She'd seen them all, the famous actors, the tech moguls, the influencers who thought they could do whatever they wanted. She had no idea that the man in seat 3B was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Keanu Reeves. But that didn't matter to Emily. She had a job to do, and if he thought he was above the rules, she would set him straight. "Excuse me, sir," Emily said, flashing her best professional smile as she approached the seat. "I'll need you to stow your bag under the seat in front of you." Keanu didn't even look up. "It's fine," he muttered, his voice soft but firm. "I'm just waiting for the flight to take off." "No," Emily said, now more insistent. "The bag needs to be under the seat." She had dealt with plenty of passengers who thought the rules didn't apply to them. This wasn't the time for a celebrity to act out. "I'm going to have to ask you to follow the rules, please." Keanu finally raised his head, the faintest smile curling at the corner of his lips, but Emily, still oblivious, noticed only that he wasn't complying. Her eyes narrowed. He wasn't taking her seriously. "If you don't mind," she continued, her tone now sharp, "I'm going to have to ask you to get off the plane. We can't start the flight if the rules aren't being followed." The surrounding passengers went silent. Some turned to look, others just pretended not to notice. Emily's words hung in the air, and for a moment there was an uncomfortable tension. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, some of them probably thinking she was overreacting. She could almost hear them whispering, "It's just a bag, lady, let it go." But rules were rules. Keanu didn't seem flustered. He stood, up slowly, not saying a word, and turned toward the aisle. He moved with the quiet grace of someone who knew how to stay calm in any situation. Emily watched him, unsure if she was doing the right thing. Just as he reached the aisle, a voice came over the intercom. "Emily, we've got a situation here. The captain would like a word with you." The call caught her off guard, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped back to give Keanu some space. But as she turned to walk toward the cockpit, something strange happened. Someone from the back of the plane stood up and whispered something to the person next to them. It was too quiet to hear, but it sent a ripple of murmurs throughout the cabin. As Emily reached the front of the plane, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a huge mistake. And then the truth hit her, in the most unexpected way. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom again, but this time it wasn't directed at her. It was for the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We just received a bit of important news. The man you see, standing in seat 3B, is not just any passenger. He is the owner of this airline." The words sank in, and in that moment Emily's heart stopped. She looked back toward the aisle where Keanu was standing, still calm and composed. "Wait, what?" Emily thought to herself, the blood rushing from her face. No way, that can't be true. But the passengers were whispering now, some recognizing him, others still too confused to understand. Emily could feel the weight of the moment, the humiliation, the sudden shift from authority to embarrassment. She had just kicked the owner of the airline off her plane. Hook. What happens when you accidentally kick a billionaire off your own flight? Stay tuned, this is just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Ever had a run-in with a celebrity you didn't recognize? The cabin was thick with tension. The murmurs from the passengers grew louder as they looked from Emily to Keanu and back again. Emily stood frozen at the front of the plane, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. The realization hit her hard. She had just kicked Keanu Reeves off her flight. Keanu, still standing at the aisle, glanced around calmly, seemingly unfazed by the whole situation. He was quiet for a moment, and Emily couldn't help but notice how composed he seemed, as if being mistaken for an unruly passenger was just a minor inconvenience in his day. He was definitely more collected than she was, that was for sure. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you'll need to come with me." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom once again. Emily's stomach flipped. She could hear the confusion in the captain's voice, but there was something else there. Something that felt like an unspoken warning. She hesitated, but then, with a deep breath, she nodded and turned back to Keanu. "Sir, I apologize," she stammered. "I didn't know who you were. I'm sorry for the confusion." Keanu simply smiled, a warm, understanding expression that almost made Emily feel like she wasn't in the middle of an absolute disaster. "It's okay," he said calmly. "Mistakes happen. I'm not angry." But Emily could tell. He wasn't angry, but the whole situation was certainly awkward. Still, she had a job to do. And she knew the flight couldn't take off until this was resolved. So with all the courage she could muster, Emily stepped forward and addressed the passengers, who were now watching her with a mix of curiosity and judgment. "I apologize for the delay, everyone," she said, trying to sound professional despite the churning in her stomach. "We are working to get things back on track." Some of the passengers nodded in understanding, while others exchanged glances. Emily could practically hear their thoughts. Who does she think she is, kicking off Keanu Reeves? A few minutes passed before Emily was summoned to the cockpit. The captain, a stern but calm man named Greg, met her with a furrowed brow. "Emily," he began, keeping his voice steady, "I'm going to need you to explain what just happened." "You kicked the owner of the airline off the plane. Do you know who he is?" "I thought—" Emily trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought he was just some guy not following the rules. He wasn't stowing his bag, and he was being difficult. I didn't know it was him." Greg sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We can't afford to have this kind of thing happen, Emily. This could cause huge PR problems for the airline." "I didn't mean to," Emily pleaded, guilt creeping up her throat. "I just followed the protocol. I thought it was my job to enforce the rules." "You're right about that," Greg replied, his tone softening slightly. "But this is a different situation. That man, Keanu, is not just some celebrity. He's our boss, and we need to make this right." Emily nodded, barely able to process what she was hearing. She had no idea what to do next. She had spent years in her role, priding herself on being the kind of flight attendant who could handle any situation. But this was beyond anything she had ever dealt with. Back in the cabin, Keanu was still standing by his seat, now talking to one of the other flight attendants, who had approached him with caution. Emily watched him from the cockpit door, her mind a whirlwind of embarrassment. He didn't seem upset, but the passengers were buzzing. Some were taking photos, others were texting, probably spreading the story to their friends. Emily could already imagine the headlines. "Flight attendant kicks Keanu Reeves off flight, chaos ensues." "Do you think he'll make a scene?" Emily asked, her voice a little shaky. "Keanu?" Greg asked with a raised eyebrow. "Not a chance, but he's not going to let this slide. We need to handle this carefully." "Okay, I get it," Emily said, swallowing hard. She turned to walk back into the cabin, but before she could take a step, Greg stopped her. "Listen, Emily, if you're going to fix this, you've got to be honest. Don't try to cover up your mistake. Own it. People respect that." Emily nodded, her heart racing as she stepped back into the cabin. The passengers were still talking, their voices low but audible, filled with speculation. And there, standing at the front of the aisle, was Keanu, calm, composed, and just waiting. She walked toward him, trying to keep her nerves in check. When she reached him, the other flight attendants stepped back, giving them some space. Emily looked up at Keanu, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Reeves," she started, her voice low. "I can't begin to apologize enough. I didn't recognize you. I made a mistake, and I should have handled it differently. Please allow me to make it right." Keanu looked at her for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he nodded, his smile returning. "It's all right," he said softly. "You were just doing your job, I understand." But Emily could hear the underlying tension in his words, and she knew it wasn't over. The passengers were still watching, waiting for something, anything to happen. "You're not mad?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu shook his head. "I'm not angry, but this could have been handled a lot better. It's not just about rules, it's about how we treat people. Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. I promise it won't happen again. As she turned to walk away, she could feel Keanu's eyes on her, and the weight of the moment hung in the air. Cliffhanger, but what would happen next? Could she repair this monumental mistake, or would it spiral into something even worse? The minutes after Emily's conversation with Keanu felt like hours. As she moved back toward her position near the front of the plane, her heart was pounding in her chest. She could still hear the murmurs of the passengers. Some were clearly intrigued by the whole situation, while others seemed more concerned about the delay. The seatbelt sign flashed on, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. We are doing our best to get things back on track, but we may experience a brief delay. We'll be airborne shortly. Emily took a deep breath. Her stomach twisted with nerves as she turned to face the cabin. Keanu was seated once more, still, calm, but the tension was palpable. The other flight attendants were avoiding eye contact with her. She didn't blame them. They probably figured she was going to be in big trouble, and there was no way to escape that. But the reality of the situation was sinking in, and Emily realized she was in deeper than she thought. It wasn't just about following protocol. This was a matter of saving her job and, frankly, her reputation within the airline. As the plane started to taxi down the runway, Emily tried to push her anxiety aside. The only thing she could do now was to focus on doing her job and hoping that somehow this would blow over. But as the plane reached cruising altitude, a sudden announcement from the captain startled her. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received an update. We'll be making a brief detour to a different airport for a special request from our passengers. We apologize for the change of plans, and we'll keep you updated. The plane jolted slightly as the engines roared louder, signaling a change. Thin direction. Emily's stomach sank. A detour? What the hell was going on? Her mind raced, and her gut told her something big was about to happen. She quickly made her way down the aisle, trying to keep her professional composure, but she couldn't ignore the feeling of unease that crept over her. As she approached the front of the plane again, she saw the flight crew gathering around the cockpit door. "Emily," Greg called out to her with a serious expression, "come here for a moment." She stepped toward him, unsure of what to expect. "Look, we have a situation," Greg said, his voice tight. "We need to smooth things over with Keanu and the passengers. This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The flight's being rerouted so he can have a private conversation with a few key people, and we need you to help facilitate it." Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean, a private conversation?" Greg lowered his voice. "The owner of this airline is about to make a major announcement, and he wants to do it with the passengers. The detour is part of the plan." Emily froze. "Wait, you're telling me the owner of this airline is actually on this flight, and he wants to speak with the passengers?" Greg nodded. "It's all part of the plan. He's doing a project with the airline and needs to announce it to a select group of people. You need to make sure everything goes smoothly. Do not make any more mistakes, Emily. This is bigger than just a flight attendant's job. You're going to be on the front lines of this situation." Emily felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. She had no idea that the man she'd kicked off the plane was about to make a big move with the airline. She had to swallow her nerves and figure out how to manage this unexpected curveball. A few minutes later, as the plane flew toward the new airport, Emily stood at the front of the cabin again. She could see Keanu at his seat, looking out the window with a peaceful expression. He looked like the same calm person who had handled the situation earlier. But now, with this new information, she couldn't help but feel like a small part of a much larger puzzle. As the plane began its descent, the lights in the cabin dimmed and an announcement came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're about to land at a new location. Please remain seated until we reach the gate. We apologize for the unexpected detour, but I assure you that you'll find this to be an exciting opportunity. Thank you for your patience." The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, but Emily kept her professional face on. She needed to keep it together. When the plane touched down, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Emily led the passengers off the plane, all the while feeling the eyes of the entire cabin on her. She couldn't help but notice how some passengers whispered to one another, their eyes darting toward Keanu. It was clear now that he wasn't just any random celebrity. This was bigger. As they reached the terminal, Emily's heart skipped a beat. A private area had been set up just for the group of passengers. The crowd was smaller, more intimate, and it wasn't long before Keanu stood up to address the gathered group. He wasn't surrounded by security or flashy publicists, just him, standing in front of the passengers with an air of confidence. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice steady. "I know this isn't what you expected today, but I wanted to share something special with you." Emily watched in awe as Keanu spoke, his words commanding the room, yet still full of warmth and humility. The passengers were hanging on every word. As she stood behind him listening, she realized just how much she had underestimated him. This wasn't just about being a celebrity, it was about understanding people and what they needed. "I've been working on a project that will change the way we think about travel," Keanu continued, his tone shifting to one of genuine excitement. "This airline is just the beginning of something much bigger. I'm here today to get your thoughts, your opinions, because this journey isn't just mine, it's ours." The room fell silent. Emily stood there, realizing that this wasn't just a detour or an accident. This was the beginning of something monumental. Keanu wasn't just the owner of an airline, he was here to make a real difference in the world of travel. Cliffhanger. Could Emily still save her career after this unexpected turn of events? Was this just the beginning of something even bigger? The room was alive with quiet murmurs as Keanu finished his speech. Emily stood near the back, her mind reeling from everything she had just witnessed. The passengers, who moments ago had been judging her, were now all focused on Keanu, on the man who just hours earlier had been kicked off his own plane by her. She glanced at him again. He was calm, composed, and every word he spoke seemed to resonate with the group. He wasn't just sharing an update on some corporate initiative. It felt personal, like he was inviting them into something bigger than they could understand. The way he spoke, the way he connected, it was like he was sharing his vision for the future of air travel, and the passengers were eating it up. Emily swallowed hard, her thoughts still racing. She was in a room full of people who had just been part of the biggest mix-up of her career, and now they were all listening intently to Keanu, hanging on every word. Keanu finished his speech with a smile. "I appreciate you all being here. This is just the beginning, and we're going to be doing a lot more. The future of travel is about connection, comfort, and creating meaningful experiences for everyone involved. This airline is just one piece of the puzzle." The room erupted into applause, the passengers' reactions a stark contrast to the discomfort just hours before. Emily clapped along with everyone else, her face flushed. She could feel her nerves beginning to settle, but the weight of the entire situation was still pressing on her shoulders. How could she have known that the man she'd thought was just a random passenger was in fact the owner of the airline, and that he was about to reveal something groundbreaking? Keanu's eyes scanned the room, landing on Emily for a brief moment. She didn't know what to expect, but when their gazes locked, he gave her a subtle nod as if to say, "It's okay. You're not the only one who's confused by all this." Emily returned a nervous smile, silently hoping that whatever happened next wouldn't be as chaotic as the last few hours had been. Suddenly, Keanu turned to the crowd again. "I'd like to personally thank Emily for being here today and for, well, her commitment to the rules." He raised an eyebrow playfully, and the room chuckled. "Without her, we wouldn't be in this situation. I respect her dedication to making sure everything runs smoothly, even if we had a little bump along the way." The room laughed, but Emily felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Keanu didn't seem upset. He wasn't using this as a moment to humiliate her. Instead, he was making light of the situation. And somehow, that made her feel like she might just get out of this mess in one piece. As the crowd continued to disperse after the announcement, Emily moved toward Keanu, who was now talking to a few of the passengers. She hesitated for a moment, still unsure of what to say or do. Keanu caught her eye and smiled warmly. "You did your job, Emily," he said quietly. "And you handled it well, despite everything. I think you've learned a valuable lesson today." Emily nodded, her voice shaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know who you were." Keanu chuckled, his smile softening the tension in the air. "It's all right, I get it. But the next time, you might want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes things aren't what they seem." She exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of her mistake finally starting to lift. "I'll definitely keep that in mind," she replied, smiling awkwardly. Keanu's gaze softened. "I think you'll be fine. In fact, I'm actually glad we got to meet under these circumstances. I'm sure it'll be a story you'll tell for years to come." He paused. "Maybe someday you'll even be able to say you were part of something bigger." Emily couldn't help but feel the tiniest spark of excitement at the thought. "Maybe," she said, her voice quiet but hopeful. But as the conversation came to a close, the air in the room began to shift again. The atmosphere wasn't as light-hearted anymore. The reality of what had just transpired seemed to settle over everyone, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this whole event had only been the beginning of something much larger than her. Simple mistake. Keanu turned to leave, his bodyguard trailing behind him. Just as he reached the door, he stopped, looking over his shoulder at Emily one last time. "You're a good person, Emily. Don't let a small mistake define you. Learn from it. We all make them. Just be sure you don't make the same one again." With that, he left the room, leaving Emily standing there, her heart a little lighter, but still full of uncertainty. As she walked back toward the plane to prepare for the next leg of the journey, she thought about what Keanu had said. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was for certain. This experience would stick with her forever. She had made a mistake, but she had also learned something important. People weren't always who they appeared to be, and sometimes the smallest decisions could lead to the biggest revelations. Cliffhanger. But with Keanu's cryptic words still echoing in her mind, Emily couldn't help but wonder, what did he really mean? Was she truly a part of something bigger? And what would her next steps be now that everything had changed? The following days passed in a blur for Emily. She kept replaying the events in her head, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if, somehow, it had been a turning point. Every time she caught herself thinking about the plane incident, a surge of anxiety washed over her. Keanu's words had stuck with her. "Learn from it. We all make mistakes. Just don't make the same one again." Her mind was racing, but there was also something else beneath the surface, a lingering feeling of unease. Keanu hadn't just been talking about her mistake with the seating arrangement or the confusion on the flight. His words had hinted at something bigger. Was he trying to tell her that her life was about to take a completely unexpected turn, or was he merely being kind in the face of a major blunder? Emily spent the next few days keeping her distance from the airline's chaos, trying to settle her thoughts. She'd heard nothing from the airline or her superiors, and that silence was deafening. What did it mean for her job? Would she even have one after all of this? But then, on the third day after the incident, everything changed. She received an email marked urgent from her supervisor, Greg. Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked open the message. Subject: immediate attention required. Urgent meeting. Dear Emily, we need you to come in for an emergency meeting with the executive team tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. This will address your recent performance and your future role within the company. Please make arrangements to be there. Sincerely, Greg. She stared at the screen for a moment, her palms sweaty. Emergency meeting? Was this it? Was her career as a flight attendant over before it even truly began? She could already feel the weight of failure pressing down on her chest, and she began to second-guess every decision she had made over the past few days. The truth was, she didn't know what to expect. But what was even more unsettling was that she couldn't stop thinking about Keanu and the words he had left her with. What if he was right? What if this moment, this mistake, was the catalyst for something else? The possibilities seemed endless, but the looming uncertainty was paralyzing. As she tried to shake off her nerves, her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. Text. Message. Emily, I need to speak with you. I have a proposal. That could change everything for you. Let me know when you're free. Keanu. She blinked in shock. Keanu, what did he want with her now? Her heart skipped a beat as she typed back, "Hi, this is Emily, what's going on?" Moments later, his reply came in. Text message, "Meet me at the address below. I'm making an offer that you won't want to turn down. 8 p.m. tonight. It's time to talk." Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. What was happening? She was about to meet Keanu again, this time outside of the chaos of the airline. She had no idea what he had in mind, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just offering her a chance to explain herself. He was offering something much bigger. That evening, Emily found herself standing outside a sleek, modern building in downtown Los Angeles. The address Keanu had sent her to was a high-rise, one of those towering glass structures that screamed luxury. She felt completely out of place, standing in front of it, unsure of what was about to unfold. She checked her watch. It was almost 8 a.m. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she stepped inside the building. The doorman greeted her with a polite nod and directed her to an elevator. It whisked her up to the top floor, and as the doors opened, she was immediately taken aback. The penthouse was expansive, elegant and tastefully decorated with minimalist furnishings, offering a sweeping view of the city lights below. And there, standing by the window, was Keanu. He turned as she entered, his expression warm yet serious. "Emily, thank you for coming," he said, his voice low but inviting. She nodded, still unsure of where to start. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought I might be in trouble." Keanu smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You've been through enough. But this isn't about trouble. This is about opportunity." He gestured toward a plush sofa. "Please sit down, we have a lot to discuss." Emily sat cautiously, her mind swirling with confusion. "Opportunity?" she echoed. "What kind of opportunity?" Keanu sat down across from her, his eyes steady. "I've been following the situation with the airline, and I think you've proven something important, that you're willing to stand by your principles, even when it costs you. You handled yourself well, despite the circumstances, and that's rare in this industry." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Keanu raised his hand to stop her. "I know it's a lot to process," he continued, "but what I'm offering you tonight is a chance to be part of something that could change everything, for you and for the airline." He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to join me on a new project. You'll be the face of the next phase of this airline's transformation, a transformation that's about more than just flying. It's about redefining what it means to be connected, to be part of something bigger." Emily's head spun. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this really happening? Was Keanu offering her the chance of a lifetime? Keanu sat back, watching her closely. "I know this sounds crazy, but I've been in this industry long enough to know that people like you, people with heart, with integrity, are the ones who drive real change, and I need someone like you in this new venture." Emily didn't know what to say. Everything in her told her to grab this opportunity with both hands, but her nerves were still too raw from everything that had happened. She was terrified of failing again. Keanu saw the hesitation in her eyes. "I understand if you're scared, but remember what I said. Mistakes are just lessons in disguise, and right now you're in the perfect position to start over." What do you say? Cliffhanger. Was Emily ready to take the leap and accept a future with Keanu? Or would the weight of her past mistakes hold her back from seizing this once-in-a-lifetime chance? The city lights outside the penthouse window sparkled like stars in the night sky, a stark contrast to the storm swirling in Emily's mind. Keanu's offer hung in the air, heavy with the weight of possibility. Her heart raced as she sat across from him, every word he spoke reverberating in her chest. Was this really happening? Keanu's gaze was steady, calm, like he had all the time in the world. But Emily felt as if time was slipping away, like she had only a few moments to decide whether to take the leap or walk away forever. "Keanu, she started, her voice shaky. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I mean, after everything that happened on the plane, I made a mistake. A big one." Keanu held up a hand, his smile reassuring. "Emily, we all make mistakes. It's not about what happened in the past. It's about how we move forward." What I see in you is potential. Someone who has the courage to learn, adapt, and make things right. That's what matters." Emily's throat tightened as she considered his words. The truth was, she had always played by the rules, always followed the protocol. But for the first time in a long time, she was being offered something outside of the ordinary, a chance to rewrite the narrative of her career, to take a step into the unknown. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "You've already been through the hardest part. You know what failure feels like, but you also know what it's like to fight through it, and that's the kind of strength this project needs." She hesitated. Could she really leave behind everything she knew? Would she be able to handle the pressure of such a high-profile role? What if she failed again? The fear of failure loomed like a dark cloud in the back of her mind. But then she thought, back to the last few days, the way she had felt when Keanu spoke those simple yet profound words. Learn from it. We all make mistakes. For once in her life, it felt like someone understood. She wasn't just a flight attendant. She was a person who had the power to change things, to make a difference. Taking a deep breath, Emily looked up at Keanu. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll join you." Keanu's eyes lit up and he nodded, the smallest trace of approval in his smile. "I knew you would. Welcome aboard, Emily. You won't regret this." The next few weeks passed in a blur of new beginnings. Emily threw herself into her new role with determination, learning everything she could about the airline's vision, the upcoming changes, and what was expected of her. She traveled with Keanu to several major cities, attending meetings with investors, designers, and marketing teams. Each time she felt more and more like she was part of something groundbreaking, something that could truly change the face of air travel. But with every new step forward came a new challenge. Emily found herself constantly balancing the pressure of her new responsibilities with the lingering fear of making another mistake. The stakes were higher now. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was representing Keanu's vision, the future of the airline, and all the passengers who depended on them. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting in New York, Emily found herself back in her hotel room, staring at her reflection. In the mirror, she was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The weight of the responsibility was starting to catch up with her, but then her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from Keanu. Text. Message. "You've done incredible work so far, Emily. You're more than ready for the next step. I want you to meet with the design team tomorrow at noon. We're finalizing the new cabin layout and your input will be invaluable. You've got this." A rush of pride flooded her chest. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an imposter. She had earned her place here. She wasn't just Keanu's employee anymore. She was an integral part of his vision, his future. The next day, as she walked into the meeting with the design team, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The plans for the new airline cabins were unlike anything she had ever seen. Luxurious, sleek, and incredibly comfortable, they were designed not just for convenience, but to enhance the entire flying experience. As she sat down at the table and began offering her insights, she realized how much she had grown in such a short time. Keanu's vision was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality. A few days later, as Emily sat on a private jet, flying back to Los Angeles after a series of meetings, Keanu joined her in the cabin. He had always been a man of few words, but today there was something different about him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a quiet intensity, as though he had been thinking deeply about something. "Emily," he said, sitting across from her, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done. This company, this project, it's going to succeed, and a big part of that is because of you." Her heart skipped a beat. She had worked hard to prove herself, but hearing Keanu say those words made everything feel worth it. "Thank you, Keanu," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his eyes thoughtful. "You're more than just a part of this project, Emily. You're a symbol of what's possible when you take risks, when you trust yourself, even after everything goes wrong." For a moment they sat in silence, the hum of the jet's engines filling the space between them. "I've learned so much from you," Emily said, her voice steady. From how to turn a mistake into an opportunity, and how to never give up no matter how hard things get. Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. I believe in you, Emily, and I think the world will soon see what I see in you. Cliffhanger. But just as Emily began to feel like she had found her place in the world, a new challenge loomed on the horizon, one that could threaten everything she had worked for. Could she truly rise to the occasion, or would her past mistakes finally catch up with her? Everything seemed perfect. Emily had finally found her rhythm with the project, gaining recognition for her contributions and growing more confident in her abilities. Keanu had become more than just her mentor. He had become a friend, someone she could rely on through the chaos of the transition. But just when things seemed to be falling into place, a new unexpected challenge arose, one that threatened to shake the foundation of everything she had worked so hard to build. It started with a phone call. Emily, we've got a situation. Greg's voice crackled through the line, the urgency in his tone clear. A serious one. The board is starting to have second thoughts about the new direction we're taking. They've raised concerns about the budget, the timeline, and well, let's just say a lot of the things you've been working on. You need to meet with them immediately. Emily's heart sank. What do you mean, second thoughts? Everything's been going so well, hasn't it? I don't know all the details, but it's bad, Greg replied. Get to the office as soon as you can. We need you to help calm them down before it spirals. The line went dead before Emily could respond. She sat frozen in place for a moment, trying to process what Greg had just said. Had she done something wrong? She had been working tirelessly, putting her heart and soul into every decision, every design choice. She couldn't afford to fail now, not when everything had finally started to align. She glanced at her phone, quickly drafting a message to Keanu. Text message. Keanu, we need to talk. Something's happening with the board. I think I've made a huge mistake, and they're starting to doubt the project. Can you meet me? A few moments later, her phone buzzed with his reply. Text message. I'll meet you there, don't worry, this is just a bump in the road. We'll figure it out together. Keanu's calm reassurance was a balm to her nerves, but the feeling of dread was hard to shake. She needed to figure out what had gone wrong, and fast. The office was bustling when Emily arrived, a stark contrast to the quiet calm she had grown accustomed to. As she walked into the boardroom, the tension was palpable. The executives sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions grim. Greg was pacing at the front of the room, clearly trying to contain his own nerves. As soon as Emily entered, all eyes turned to her. Emily, we need answers, one of the senior board members, Henry, said curtly. The numbers aren't adding up. We're seeing major overruns and we're behind schedule. If this keeps up, we'll lose investors. And worse, we'll lose our standing in the market. Emily felt her chest tighten. I don't understand. We've been making progress. We've secured partnerships, and the cabin redesign is getting rave reviews. How could this happen? The problem isn't with the design, Emily, another board member, Clara, interjected. It's with the logistics, the implementation. And we're hearing rumors that the press is starting to catch wind of our delays. That's a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The room fell silent as the weight of their words sank in. Emily knew they were right. She could feel the pressure mounting. The stakes were higher than ever, and the project was teetering on the edge of disaster. Just then the door opened and Keanu stepped inside. His presence seemed to calm the room, even if only for a moment. He walked confidently toward the table and stood beside Emily. I'm sorry to interrupt, Keanu said, his voice smooth and steady. But I think we need to recalibrate here. Emily is doing everything in her power to make this work, and if there are issues, we'll address them together. We're not backing down, not now. He turned to Emily with a reassuring look. We've got this. Emily's pulse quickened, but his unwavering confidence gave her a sense of strength she hadn't realized she needed. She took a deep breath and stood up to address the room. I understand the concerns, she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety clawing at her insides, and I agree that we need to resolve these issues immediately, but we can't let one setback destroy everything. We've worked for Keanu's right. We have the potential to turn this around. What we need is a solid plan of action, and we need to act fast. The executives exchanged wary glances, but there was a shift in the air. Emily's words had struck a chord. She wasn't just an employee in this room anymore. She was a leader, and they were beginning to see that. Keanu stepped forward, his eyes locking with each of the board members. I didn't invest in this project just to watch it fail. I believe in what we're doing. And if there's anyone who can solve this, it's Emily. She's got the vision and the dedication to make this work. He turned to Emily, giving her a small nod. We'll figure this out, together. It was a pivotal moment for Emily. For the first time since the initial crash landing of her career, she realized that her role in this project was more than just executing a plan. It was about leading the charge through the toughest challenges. And with Keanu by her side, she felt ready to tackle whatever came next. The following weeks were intense. Emily, Keanu, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly to rework the timeline, reallocate resources, and make the necessary adjustments to keep the project on track. There were late nights and long hours, but Emily found herself growing more confident as the days passed. The pressure, once overwhelming, had become a driving force. One evening, as she sat in the office reviewing some final designs before a big presentation, Keanu walked in with a cup of coffee in hand. "How's it going?" Emily looked up and smiled tiredly. "It's coming together, slowly but surely." He sat across from her, setting the coffee down on the table. "I'm proud of you, you know. You've really stepped up." Her heart swelled at his words. "Thank you, Keanu. I couldn't have done it without your support. Before she could finish, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. The message was from Greg. Text message. "We just got word from the investors. They're happy with the new plan. We're back on track. They've agreed to move forward. You did it, Emily." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as the reality of the message sank in. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned everything around. Keanu smiled, his eyes warm with pride. "See, I told you we'd make it," cliffhanger. But just as things were finally looking up, a mysterious phone call would soon send Emily down a new path, one that could threaten not just the project, but everything she had worked so hard to build. It was a few days after the breakthrough with the investors when Emily received the call that would shake her to the core. She had just wrapped up a meeting with the design team in the office, and the relief of finally getting everything back on track had felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. Keanu had been right. Together, they had managed to pull the project from the brink of disaster. She should have been celebrating. But instead, as she sat in her office alone, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for only a second before answering. "Hello, Emily." The voice on the other end was cold, calculated. It was a man's voice, one she didn't recognize, but it carried an unmistakable authority. "I think you need to hear what I have to say." Her heart skipped. Something about the tone sent a chill down her spine. "Who is this?" "I'm someone who knows more about Keanu Reeves than you think, and I know exactly what's been happening with your little project." Emily's pulse quickened. Her mind raced, trying to figure out who could be behind this. What did they... "No, what do you mean? What's happening?" The voice chuckled darkly, sending an eerie sensation through her. "Let's just say that not everything about Keanu's investments is as clean as you think. You've been working with him for months, and you still don't know who you're really dealing with." She felt a knot form in her stomach. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out soon enough. But here's a piece of advice, Emily. Watch your back, because people like Keanu don't just give things away for free. There's always a price to pay." The call ended abruptly, leaving Emily standing frozen, the phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the device. The room felt suddenly small, suffocating. She couldn't shake the words from her mind. "Watch your back. There's always a price to pay." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the words echoed in her head, the voice from the phone ringing louder and louder. She had always trusted Keanu. He had been there for her, supported her when everything seemed to be falling apart. But now, Doughty, crept in like a shadow, casting a dark cloud over her thoughts. She couldn't just ignore the warning. What if there was some truth to it? What if she had been blinded by Keanu's kindness and had missed something darker lurking beneath the surface? The next morning she went into the office early, the stillness of the empty space offering little comfort. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop, her hands shaky as she typed in a search for any recent news about Keanu. She had to know the truth. She had to find out if there was something she didn't know. But all she found was the same information she had seen 1,000 times before: the actor, the philanthropist, the business mogul who had made his name on legitimate ventures. There was nothing that raised any immediate red flags. Still, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Keanu. Text message: "I've been thinking about our next move. Want to meet me at the office this afternoon? I've got some exciting updates to share." Emily stared at the message, her thoughts racing. She knew she had to go, but she also knew she had to be careful. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't know the full story about Keanu. She had trusted him completely, but was it possible that there were things he had been hiding? She quickly typed a reply. Text message: "Sure, I'll be there at 2 p.m. When Emily walked into the office that afternoon, Keanu was already there, as always, calm and composed. He stood by the window gazing out at the city, his profile illuminated by the afternoon sunlight. He turned as she entered, offering a warm, familiar smile. "Emily, good to see you," he said, his voice smooth as always. "I've got some great news. The investors are thrilled with the new plan, and we're already seeing some significant interest from the press. This is going to be huge." He walked over to the desk, his easy confidence filling the room. Emily nodded, trying to appear focused, but her mind was elsewhere. The voice on the phone, the warning, it all gnawed at her. "You seem a little distracted today," Keanu said, arching an eyebrow. "Is everything okay?" Emily hesitated. She had no proof, no evidence to back up her doubts, but she needed to know. "Keanu, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice more serious than she intended. "Have you ever been involved in anything shady, or anything that might raise concerns with the investors?" Keanu's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "What do you mean, shady? I mean, have you ever done anything that could damage the project? Anything that might jeopardize our reputation?" He studied her. For a moment, his eyes narrowing. Emily's heart raced as she awaited his response. Was this the moment when everything would unravel? "I've been in business long enough to know that there are always risks," Keanu said slowly, his tone almost too calm. "But I've never done anything that would hurt this company or the people I work with. If you're worried, Emily, you have every right to be, but know this, I'm not hiding anything from you, not now, not ever." His words, though reassuring, didn't fully calm the storm of doubt in her chest. He was being too defensive. "I trust you, Keanu. I need to be sure," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu gave her a long look before nodding. "I understand. I want you to feel confident in everything we're doing together. But know this. You're not alone in this, Emily. We're in this together, and I'll always have your back." As he spoke, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was being left unsaid. She wanted to believe him, she really did, but the nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't let her rest. Cliffhanger. Just as Emily was about to ask him more, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was from Greg, and it read, "We've just received an anonymous tip about Keanu. I think you need to see this." Emily stared at the phone screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The message from Greg was brief, but it hit like a punch to the gut. "We've just received an anonymous tip about Keanu. I think you need to see this." Her breath caught in her throat. She glanced up at Keanu, who was now standing by the window again, his back to her. He seemed so composed, so unaffected. But everything in her mind was screaming that something was wrong. The doubts that had been festering inside her over the past few days were now threatening to explode into full-blown suspicion. She couldn't just ignore it. Emily quickly typed a response to Greg. Text message. "What do you mean? What's the tip?" Keanu turned to face her as the message sent, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, though his face remained unreadable. There was a brief silence before Emily's phone buzzed once again. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't help herself. Text message. I'll explain in person. Meet me at the office. You need to see what we have on Keanu. Emily's blood ran cold. Keanu, she started, her voice trembling. I need to go. It's about the project. There's something I have to clear up with Greg. Keanu's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her stomach churn. He nodded, though his gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual, as if he was trying to read her. Go ahead, he said softly, but there was a hint of something unreadable in his tone. I'll be here when you get back. Emily grabbed her coat, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. She didn't know what Greg had discovered, but she knew that things were about to take a turn she wasn't prepared for. Every instinct told her to run, to get away from Keanu, to protect herself, but the truth was she had already been dragged too deep into the web. When Emily arrived at the office, she found Greg waiting outside. He didn't say a word, but motioned for her to follow him into a small conference room. The door clicked shut behind them, and Emily's breath caught in her throat when Greg placed a stack of papers on the table. Greg, what is all this? What is all? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg's face was grave, his eyes weary. I wish I didn't have to show you this, Emily, but you deserve to know the truth. He flipped through the papers, pulling out a few key documents. Emily's eyes widened as she read through them. They were contracts, bank statements, and emails, each one tying Keanu to a series of questionable deals that seemed to involve offshore accounts, money laundering, and connections to dubious international investors. There's more, Greg said quietly. The tip we received wasn't just about financials, it's about Keanu himself. What do you mean? Emily's voice was tight as she looked up from the documents, her mind racing. Greg hesitated before speaking. It turns out, Keanu Reeves isn't just the celebrity you think he is. He's been operating under several aliases for years. There's evidence here that shows he's been involved in business deals with people who, let's just say, don't have the best reputations. And some of these deals might even involve the project you've been working on. Emily's blood ran cold. She felt the floor shift beneath her. This couldn't be real. She had trusted Keanu. He had been there for her through everything. But now the truth felt like it was slipping through her fingers, and she was powerless to stop it. Greg, continued, his voice strained, I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is clear. I don't know how deep this goes, but if we don't act fast, it could bring everything down with it. The investors, the company, everything you've worked for. Emily felt a wave of nausea sweep over her. She had been so sure of Keanu, so certain that he was the one person she could count on. And now everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, felt like it was crumbling before her eyes. She drove back to the office in a daze, unable to shake the flood of emotions rushing through her. Betrayal, confusion, and anger, all mixed together in a whirlwind of thoughts. How could she have been so blind? When she stepped into the office, Keanu was still there, sitting at his desk, working as if nothing had changed. He looked up as she entered, offering a small smile. You're back earlier than I expected, he said, his voice smooth. Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. Her mind was still spinning, trying to process everything she had just learned. Keanu, she started, her voice faltering. There's something I need to ask you. He put down his pen, his eyes softening as he leaned back in his chair. Anything, Emily, what's going on? She hesitated, the weight of the situation heavy on her shoulders, but she couldn't run from the truth any longer. Not if she wanted to protect everything she had worked for. I found out about your past, she said, her voice trembling. I know about the offshore accounts, the shady deals. I know about the things you've been hiding from me. Keanu's expression didn't change. He stood up slowly, walking toward her, his calm demeanor unchanged. Emily. He took a breath, his voice almost sad. I should have told you, but I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you To see the parts of my past that I've been trying to leave behind. Emily's heart raced as he continued. Yes, there are things in my past that aren't pretty. But the person you see now, the person who's been helping you with this project, I'm trying to make up for all of it. I want to do things right. Emily felt a wave of emotions crash over her: anger, hurt, betrayal, but also understanding. She didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was clear. Nothing about her life or the project would ever be the same again. Resolution and reflection. The decision Emily made in that moment would define not only her career, but her future. Would she walk away, leaving everything behind, or would she trust Keanu and fight for the vision they had built together? The truth was, she wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Have you ever faced a moment where everything you thought you knew was turned upside down? How did you deal with it?